good evening, good evening, and welcome to Pause for the Truth. I am Jocelyn Turner, your co host, and we are so excited that you've decided to join us this evening as we have yet another interesting conversation. Joining me, as usual, is co host Dr. Rogers Kane. How are you this evening, Dr. Kane?
I'm doing fine. Hairline and all. If the evening is great. I'm happy to be here. Happy to have the opportunity to talk, meet new guests, hosts, guest panelists. Sorry, and participate in some interesting conversation.
Yeah, and we also have joining us Sabrina Carson, someone new, Dr. Kane, that's joining us on the show. How you doing this evening?
I'm doing great. I'm excited to be here. Looking forward to the conversation, the dialogue, and meeting some new people, and just looking forward to this evening.
Well, we promise that we're not going to beat up on you tonight in terms of directing all the questions to you because we do have a couple more guests to join us, but we'd like to start off as our other guests are chiming in. We want to talk about, oh, wait a minute, someone just
Keep
joined in.
me on.
How you doing tonight?
I'm doing well. How you doing?
Doing good. And so while we're waiting for our other guests, just quickly, if you would, Dr. Mosley, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I'm an educator. I'm an administrator in the school system with Duval County Public Schools. Have a nonprofit, Bridge Builders United, where we mentor youth from 9 years old to 17. And just a big advocate for youth. I love working with youth, especially young men. And so this is what I do every day. That's my ministry.
And tell us a little bit about your family, since that's going to be part of the conversation.
Okay, I have a 11-year-old daughter and a 13-year-old son. So I'm right there with this. This is going to be a very good topic for me because I recently had some conversations with my son that were very candid and very transparent.
I happen to, just for full disclosure, I know Jerome quite well. And I know his kids quite well, and I saw him when they was about this big, and just to hear that husky voice coming out of his son right about now, it's amazing. And, he was in my office one day, and I'm going, who is that man up at my front desk?
So,
So
Ms. Carson, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Okay. Well, I'm an educator as well. I'm currently a school social worker. I was in the classroom for about 8 or 9 years, teaching elementary. Um, I've always worked with children and families, even with the Department of Children and Family as well. I've done foster care. I am a single parent of a freshman in college, actually just finishing up her first year in college. So she just turned 19 years old, and it's working with children and raising my daughter has been just the best blessing. Um, Me and Dr. Mosley and I work together, and we often find ourselves deep in the conversation talking about the youth of today, or even our school, and the things that we feel will be beneficial for the youth. So I'm just excited to be here and to join and learn from this dialogue as well.
Well, it sounds like you both are obviously poised and the perfect people to talk about tonight's discussion, which is the talk Black parents have with their children. And we've had this conversation amongst each other, right? We talk about the conversation that we need to have nowadays, as Dr. Kane and I talked about. The conversation or the talk can't just be with our young men, but it's also with our young ladies too, in terms of our daughters and nieces. So I'm going to start with you, Dr. Mosley, since you mentioned it, you had the conversation recently. Start out by telling our listeners who may be unfamiliar with the talk. What does that mean?
So basically, it's really being transparent. So um, with my son, I knew he was getting at the age where, he was, interested, not saying interested in girls, but, started, communicating with girls or, things of that nature. So I felt like, okay, yeah, I need to start having a conversation with him. And some of the red flags for me, rather, I don't know, I guess you could call them red flags. He was interested in, he's trying to grow hair on his chin. He want to shave. I said, you ain't got nothing to shave. Those type of things. So I said, well, I think it's time for me to have this conversation with him. And with him being 13, I said, well, we need to, I asked him about sex. That was the number one thing. And one of the things that I've always told parents about is, hey, you can't sugarcoat anything when you're talking to your kids, because if you don't tell them about it, they're going to learn from somewhere, whether it be from another person or if they go on the internet and type in certain things, it's going to come up. So you really want it to come from you, and you control that dialogue and expose them to, that communication on what is sex. And so we had a very, very good conversation in regards to that. Just being very candid. I don't know how detailed you want me to go into that conversation, but
the conversation that we also would like to get into is that conversation where we're concerned about our Black boys and girls as it relates to their interaction with the rest of the outside world, like with police and
yes. So
that are really life. They can become a very life-threatening situation when it comes down to dealing with the authorities.
Oh yeah. Yeah, so we definitely, and I think I talked to him about that more than anything. So we've had the conversation, even when it's times that these kids get in trouble, or teenagers get in trouble, they show those videos when they get shot, when the police pull them over, and he's asking those questions, well, why did that happen? Well, I tell him, okay, well, let's look at it and see what happened. What did he do that you think he shouldn't have did? And he always said, well, why he kept asking the police all these questions? Why he just didn't do what the police say? I say, well, there you go. I say, just because you might have the right of freedom of speech to say what you want to say, you get pulled over by the police, you follow their directions. Don't just come off on the offensive, because then they're already going to think that something's not right. That's gonna start putting up red flags for them. So I tell them, any adult, you be respectable to them. You let the parents, you let me handle any situation that you have if adults are trying to, whatever it is, especially even with the police. And I say that goes for people in your school, the dean, the administrators, your teacher. You don't try to fight that fight. You let me fight that fight. You keep your mouth closed and you listen to what they have to say, and you do what they tell you to do. And so, I pretty much put it in that type of dialogue, but we always talk about it because, we can't assume our kids know what to say or do in them situations, because they're going to go by what they see on TV. So we have to break it down to them and tell them, no, this is what you should be doing. Forget you trying to be a man or be hard and try to defend yourself or know the law. You let them people do their job, and you do what you're supposed to do. And then you let the proper people take over and find out if they did anything wrong.
Well, nowadays, though, Dr. Mosley, so many of these young people said, well, they disrespected me. I'm not going to let anybody disrespect me. Why are they so aggressive or just so bent, I don't want to say hell bent, but so stuck on, they're not going to disrespect me. They don't want anybody who they feel disrespects them, they want to retaliate.
So respect gains respect in their mindset. That's how a lot of them are raised. That's a part of their culture. That's where they come from. You're going to respect me. If you disrespect me, I'm going to disrespect you. I'm not going to respect you. They even do that towards the teachers. And we tell them, what does that mean? Why? You know, you do what you have to do. Don't always consider that, okay, you being disrespected, that you're going to come back. You're not going to win that situation, not with the teachers, not with the police or anybody. Be quiet, listen to what they say, follow instructions, and go from there. If you feel that you were disrespected, you let your parents fight that fight. Because the more and more you argue back, cuss the teacher out, cuss the police out, at the end of the day, you're the one in trouble. With the police, at the end of the day, you're in handcuffs and you can't explain anything because you became more of the aggressor. And I think it's just in their mind. That's their mindset is, oh, you ain't gonna disrespect me. You know, you're not gonna do that. But at the end, you have to look at what the long term, and they don't think long term, but they got to look at those things of the consequences of what's gonna happen. Let the proper people fight their fight. Period.
One of my concerns is that at the end of the day, I might. This is going to sound a little odd, but I might feel better that they aren't handcuffed, because then I know they're not on the ground dead with a bullet in the back or a bullet in the head. And that's one of those things that my parents were very fearful of when they had that talk with us. Miss Carson, what's your thought on that?
Like I said, I have a 19-year-old daughter, and of course, we've had similar conversations as well. And one of the things I had to share with her is life isn't fair.
All the time.
Sometimes you have to do things that you may not necessarily agree with, but neither is favor. So you have to keep that in mind as well. At the end of the day, your safety is most important. And if you can, deal with the situation and be safe and come home, like Dr. Jerome said, the best thing is we can deal with any other issues later on in life. I just, I've always talked to her, told her about, being respectful of others and the law. And the biggest thing is your safety. People aren't haven't been raised the way that you've been raised. People may not respect authority the way that you've been taught to respect authority. So you just have to take the situation as it is at hand when it comes to dealing with the authority. And even when you were talking about respect situations, dealing with respect, and of course we hear that from our students all the time. Well, they don't respect me, or she said this, or the biggest thing is they have an attitude, so to speak. And it is a difficult thing to tell a child about about respect and attitude, because a lot of these attitudes and behaviors stem from home or things that they see on the media or from television when it comes to gaining respect or having an attitude. And they don't realize that every situation doesn't necessarily warrant an opportunity to go back and forth with someone. You have to know when to choose your battles. And like we always say at the school, let your parent fight your battle when it comes to an adult. And just reminding children that, you are a child, and, and your parent is the one that will advocate on your behalf, or someone else in a leadership position.
So, gosh, I lost my train of thought. So how early let me back it up. Let me back up a second before I ask the next question. Why is it that Black parents have historically had the talk with their children? And at what age does that talk typically start?
And let me add a little bit of flavor to that, is because the elephant in the room, we're going to have to get to racism at some point in this conversation. Okay. So now proceed with Ms. Turner's question, and whomever wants to answer first.
Go ahead, Ms. Carson.
I'm trying to think. So in reference to racism, how early does it start? I don't know.
How early do you have the talk? First of all, let's talk about what is the talk, and I'll say it. So the talk, for those of you who don't know it, because I don't have any children, so I haven't had the talk with a child of my own. I've had the talk with others. So when we talk about the talk, because I had some folks when I shared the flyer, like the talk, what does that mean? And those are people who obviously did not look like me, but the ones who did, they said, oh, we already know what that means, right? And what the talk means is, as our Black children grow up and reach a certain age or level of maturity that some people feel their particular child is mature enough to understand the conversation or the talk, it is the talk about when you leave home, everybody's not going to feel about you the way that we feel about you or care about you or love you, right? And or even respect you. So when you go out in the world, here's how you interact with people. And unfortunately, it might be people who don't look like you, right? As Dr. Mosley said a few minutes ago, you respect authority. As Ms. Carson said, when you're at school, you respect authority. Unfortunately, there have been so many instances of our young people, Black and brown people, who have been wrongly accused of things or disrespected, not disrespected,
Mistreated.
harmed, mistreated in ways that because the child did not understand the interaction, the disrespect and feeling of being threatened by that individual warranted or escalated a situation that could unfortunately went in a whole bad way. So knowing all of that, if you didn't know what the talk is, and again, that's just my opinion of what the talk is, and you can add to it. At what age do you feel it is important to have that talk? Because somebody might be a new parent or maybe the parent of an elementary age child and 10 years old. Is 10 years old too early to have the talk? If not, at what age should parents have the talk? Before I continue with that question, I want to welcome our third panelist, Rockman Johnson. How are you doing this evening, Rockman?
Good to be with you. Sorry, I had a little technical problem getting in, and good to see all the panelists, especially my good friend and classmate, Dr. Mosley.
How you doing, sir?
Wow, small world. Well, listen, I realized that you all didn't get the memo because the memo is still twirling in my.
That's okay. That's okay.
I apologize for that. But anyway, we were talking about at what age, what's the earliest age that parents should have the talk with our Black youth?
Well, let's get Mr. Johnson's view on the talk first.
You know, I think it's important, and thank you so much, Dr. Kane. I think it's important for us to start at the beginning. And I come from a household and parents that started having the talk with me from almost inception. I don't remember not having the talk. And it's a little bit different when it comes to Black boys. Not that there's anything, that there's a talk that has to come with Black girls, but it's something different. Today was my final day of classes, and it's one of the questions I asked my students. I said, hey, I'm going on this podcast tonight. And for those of you that have children or brothers and sisters, when did you all either get the talk or have the talk? And a great preponderance of them had not had the talk and weren't even understanding of what the talk was. My mother, however, coming from, I guess, a generation of revolution and understanding of what they went through, I was made at the age when I really understood what it was. I was a taller kid. I wasn't muscular, but I was tall. But I was really a happy kid. I had a really happy childhood, bouncing around, just enjoying life. And I had a habit of, if my mother sent me in the store, to just bounce out. And it was that moment I remember mom saying, and I remember at 8 years old, if I remember correctly, she was saying, anytime you go in a store, you get a receipt and you get a bag. You don't come out of a store unless your stuff is in a bag. Didn't know what she was doing then, but it protected me in her mind. And then by age 12 was when that moment when mom sat me down and had the official talk with me and required me to read Dr. Jawanza Kunjufu's book, Countering the Conspiracy to Destroy Black Boys. She made me read that at age 12, right? And it then had me focused on a time where I really understood that there was a responsibility that I had, but also in some cases, there was a target on my back. So I think it's never too early to start, but I don't want us to equip our children, or excuse me, not equip. I don't want us to handicap our children by making them think there is something wrong or bad, but we must have the talk and help them understand that because we are in the culture that we are, there are certain things that decorum dictates.
Well, I have to put my step in with both feet because I am the senior in this particular group of people. And, so I got the older talk, especially. But the older talk really wasn't much different from Mr. Johnson's talk and probably yours, Mr. Mosley and Ms. Carson. And that is that because, and I'm going to paraphrase what my parents said because they didn't use they didn't articulate like I'm about to articulate. But they basically said, you're in a white male dominated world in which you have a target on your back. If you are not careful, you may be harmed. They raised the issue of, the Emmett Till deal that kills as it relates to what happened with Emmett Till and everybody, most people know about that. But they had a discussion as to how you maintain your safety in the presence of those people that are in charge of society. When you run into the police, how you should act. It's like, boy, when you see the police pulls you over, sit up straight. Put your hands where they can see them. Do this, do that. It was all about protecting yourself from harm from the powers to be in our society. And especially that would be the police, as we know. Eventually, the police got involved, whether or not it's because it was some white person, non-police person, that may threaten you, but then involve the police to handle their desires of harming you. So, that's kind of paraphrasing what they put out to me. But I digress. I let my guests go ahead and talk and discuss what they feel.
So I guess from the standpoint of when you look at it that way, I think now definitely these days of time, the earlier is better. Now I think back, when I was growing up, that type of talk was, I don't know about the specifics of it being that way, I guess, but whatever was going on in the times at that time. But the way I was growing up from, I mean, we respected the police, but I grew up in the hood and we respected the police and all that stuff like that, but we didn't have a lot of these big issues or nothing like that. So we didn't have Rodney King situation. We didn't have all of that. So the talk was a little different. It was like, you keep you again, you pay for the stuff you buy, you have a receipt, all that type of stuff. You go in the store, don't touch nothing, that type of stuff. But the talk was a little different back then. But now it has to be done earlier in elementary because these kids, they're exposed to so much. And if you don't teach them anything in the store with their parent and walks out the store and grabs something
and I think
by
it's
mistake.
the influence of social media.
Oh yeah,
the
definitely.
fact that they are, as he said, they're exposed to oh, there he is. I was trying to fill in for you, Dr. Mosley.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, we heard you.
So
we heard you. And in particular, I'm hearing you guys saying having a little earlier, but let me just be honest. My parents really had this talk to me very early on because, that was more overt racism back then. So you got a chance to see it, to feel it, even as naive as I was. If I looked in the mirror at an earlier stage, I saw Superman in the mirror, but Superman didn't look like me. Superman looked like some white man. Okay. And that was the image that they was implanting in my mind. However, when I was out in the general public, I looked like no white man. I was a black boy, man, boy, whatever. I was a threat to them. And my parents wanted to make sure I appreciated what my threat to them was. I was not a tall kid. I was not a big kid, but I was a black kid. and I represented a threat to many others in society that did not look like me. And they wanted to make sure I understood what threat I may pose to others and what harm that may cause me as a black male and as a black person. Period. Ms. Carson, I don't want to leave you out of the conversation, so please chime in.
I guess for me, growing up, there wasn't much communication going on in my household. My parents worked, so I don't recall specifically having a talk with my parents. However, I can say that with my daughter, and I feel that with some youth, depending on the nature of the culture of where you're being raised, my conversation with her, I don't know exactly when it started, but it's been an ongoing conversation over the years, depending on where the circumstances was, the school that she was attending, and her being one of the only 2 or 3 black students in the classroom, to participating in dance or theater and not being selected, possibly because of race or something of that nature, and moving on to college and so forth. So that conversation has always been ongoing, depending on where she was in life or circumstances that we found ourselves surrounded in. And so I think the conversation based on the family, the culture, the surrounding circumstances, that the parents need to decipher when to actually have that conversation with their child. It definitely needs to be an open conversation, but it also needs to be something said on the level of the child to where they can actually understand it and receive it in the right way. I wouldn't want a child to grow up hearing a conversation about racism that at a young age, and they develop this ideals in the back of their head that they grow up with, and as they come into situations, they have a chip or something on their shoulder because they've learned that what racism is. So you have to modify it to your child's needs at that time and at that particular age.
And that's a good point.
One last thing.
We don't want to make sure that
JT, before you go further, let's also, one of the things that we talked about doing was bringing in our behind the scenes guy that at some point, because he has kids of a different age, some boys as well. Let's bring him into the conversation. But go ahead and finish your question, and let's invite Mr. Jackson into our conversation as well.
Thank you. What I was going to comment on, one thing that I wanted to be clear is when we talk about having the talk with our young people, we're not encouraging them to hate people of other races. What we're having a conversation about, as I mentioned earlier, is letting them know that unfortunately, when you leave your house and the people around you and your family, there may be people who treat you differently because of how you look, because of your race or whatever. So it doesn't mean that we're trying to make our children paranoid about being around people of other races and cultures. And so I'm so glad, Sabrina, that you, and I hope it's okay to call you Sabrina, I'm Jocelyn. And I'm glad that you said what you did, Sabrina, because it is important that when you have the talk of the conversation, that it is appropriate at the age level of the children or young people that you are talking to. And if you haven't heard, Tyrone Jackson is our technology guru. And every now and again, he comes from behind the scenes and interject his expertise or his thoughts on the conversation tonight. So we're calling on Tyrone to tell us.
That's because he got something to say.
What you think about the talk, Tyrone?
Awesome. Thank you once again for allowing me to come from behind the scenes. And this is a subject that I feel very passionate about, as I think our panelist has. I have 2 boys. I have an older daughter, and I have 3 grandsons. So when you start talking about the talk, what I did like is when I heard Ms. Carson and then also Mr. Johnson say that this is a process that starts early on. The first thing is to teach your children respect of their elders, respect in general. So then once you have a talk, what you're talking about is how to diffuse a situation that has gotten out of hand. So you then interrupt the whole concept of they wrong me or those other negative things, because you've already put them in a position to have well, I told my boys, you have the position of right and authority. I think a couple of them said that, let the adults fight the fight. But your job as a child is this, and then explain that to them and allow them to act accordingly.
Thank you. And that's so true. If you're just joining us tonight, we have an esteemed panel of guests, primarily educators from different levels within our systems of academia. And so we brought them on tonight to talk about the talk that Black parents have with their children. As we often know, almost every day, unfortunately, at any given place around America, there's been some interaction or encounter of a young person who has encountered a situation that escalated and got out of control. And unfortunately, it ended up with that young person not surviving that situation. And so tonight's conversation is we're having it because we want parents to understand that we know you're not alone. First of all, we know that you have to navigate the system of where we are now. Dr. Kane shared his perspective on the conversation that his parents had with him as a young person. Dr. Mosley talked about the conversation has evolved, and he felt that it was different from the conversation that he had. Rockman, on the other hand, said that the young people that he talked to never even heard of the talk. So I say to all of you, and Sabrina talked about the conversation she had with her daughter. We sometimes don't think about the conversation. And by the way, point of reference, I never heard the talk. My parents never had the talk with me, but they had it with my brothers. So I just wanted to say that. So I didn't even know what the talk was for a long time because it was never had with me. The older I got, I understood what that meant. But why is it, Rockman, that you think the conversation with today's young people are not happening as it has with us in the past? Oh, pardon me. I didn't mean to make you old and put you in the same category as me.
Well, interestingly enough, so here's the thing. As you know, and we're not old. We're just seasoned. Well,
Wise.
Yeah, whatever.
right. So I think one of the things is freedom. My grandmother and other elders of the community used to say something about sometimes and I don't want anybody to jump on me or take this the wrong way, but I'd heard some elders, and Jocelyn, as you know, I've hung around a lot of our seasoned community leaders in this community. And one of the things they would say was that one of the worst things that could have ever happened to the Black community was integration.
Yep.
And I knew, my grandmother was highly educated. She was a principal and had several degrees. So was my mother. My mother was an administrator, a speech pathologist. But I also knew Black women that were domestics. And you wouldn't be able to tell the difference between the educational level of the two. The way that they spoke, the way that they carried themselves, the way they would adorn themselves in suits. They knew how to, the etiquette, how to have tea parties and play bridge and things that we may look, they were just elegant women, and they didn't have supposedly a formal education, some of them. The reason I put that out there, Jocelyn, is because now we have so many freedoms. And our parents, the parents that are in this space, in the zeitgeist of where we are, want to give their children experiences, quote unquote, that they did not have. So they try not to have the talk. They want to make sure that the society is homogenized and we're post-racial. We've had a Black president, all of these things, when the thing that we saw during the Trumpian years and the Trump presidency was that it was there, but they needed a space to have the freedom in which to express how they really felt. So it's important that we have these talks with our children so that they know not to come in and say that I'm less than because I look different than you, but to say, here is the nuances of what some people are thinking. But we as in this zeitgeist, we as parents in this generation aren't sharing that with our kids. And sometimes, and I'm gonna shut up after this, we're just too busy. We got 2 and 3 jobs. We are trying to update our Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, and TikTok. We're trying to go to school online. We're taking a yoga class over here on the iPad. We've got so many things going on in our lives where, you know, the one thing not one thing, but one of the things that I'm so glad that I learned besides how to pray is also how to meditate. My belief is that prayer is my conversation with God. Meditation is when I shut up and I have the space for God to speak to me, right? And in that space, even with my 3-year-old now, I've got videos of him. We just sit there and meditate. And he may not know or understand now, but I'll say, hey, you're running amok. He'll say, amok? I say, yeah. And then he'll just sit there and say, breathe in, breathe out. And in that space, it is planting the seed. So we've got to do more of that. And make sure that we equip our children, because when we don't equip them with ways, as the gentleman said earlier, which you are so right, let them know that you sometimes have to take the higher ground by shutting up and holding your peace. If we don't equip them, we will have to expect to bury them.
I find it interesting when you mentioned a couple of things.
Sure.
You talked about, you know, the worst thing that happened, and I've heard it as well. Worst thing that happened in the Black community was integration. And one of the reasons that people explained to me, they said that was because before integration, we were a village. Okay. We knew of each other. We talked to each other. I remember times when I run into my teachers in the grocery store. Back then, Winn-Dixie is where the local grocery store we went to. And I hated it when I ran into my teacher because she would tell my mom everything that I was and was not doing, you know, and my mom would give them the right to administer punishment or whatever to me when I was in the wrong. Your neighbors, your teachers were your neighbors, your principals were your neighbors. It was a village in which we raised our kids, but then once integration took place, I don't want to say the village was destroyed, but it was totally disrupted because we moved to different aspects of town, and not to belabor anything about somebody feeling they were better than others or whatever it is. We just became somewhat disrupted as a community, and we no longer looked out for each other like we did before integration. So I understood now, especially now, I can appreciate what they were saying. The one thing I never did, and I hate to make this a testimonial on me, but the one thing I never did, I never took the approach of wanting my kids to, I want them to have more than what I had, because my thing was, we didn't have a lot. We didn't, we were poor. I didn't realize we were poor. And that was a good thing, because the fact that you don't want anybody to feel what the pain and of growing up that you did may be more protective in giving a false presentation of what life is all about. I didn't turn out that bad. So my experience, not that, at least my mama say that. Now, everybody else might say something different. My mama say I ain't turned out that bad. So, but in terms of wanting them to experience life, I wanted them to experience it so that they can appreciate themselves and others. When you just don't, if you just want to give them the latest fads and everything that all the other kids and not allow them to want to desire something, you're taking something away from them. And so, they need that I think I felt my kids needed to have the desire, not desire. They needed to have the need of something to work, to be able to work and earn something. Not everything was given to them on a platter. But I know we're talking about the talk, and that was part of what it was about, and that is you don't expect to, you cannot expect that the world owe you something. You cannot walk out there and think that people are going to treat you as mom and dad treat you and love you. People have this, again, that R word comes up, racism and the disrespect that you have as a Black person is prevalent in our society. And you need to learn how to protect yourself against the harm that it may cause in terms of your interaction with the other people on the other side of town.
Yeah, one article I read said the person described the talk as prepping your children for the realities of society that they have to navigate. So, I mean, when you think about all the things that we have to navigate, all the nuances that we deal with from day to day, we walk out our house expecting to just have a regular day as everybody else. But because we are of, we're African Americans, that's different. Those things that we go out and do are different. And so, Sabrina, I'd just like to ask you, have you heard anything? We always hear about the experiences that our Black males have. Have you heard of any females talking about experiences that they've had as far as interacting or dealing with those realities of society as they navigate life?
The only thing I can think of offhand when it comes to females navigating, I think a lot of things that female have is in reference to image, in reference to image and the expectations of, being a female and what they look like and what's not acceptable. But I also think that's kind of evolving with, the natural, what the idea of what beauty is. And what's being accepted and what's not accepted. But thankfully, I think, with the natural hairstyles and so forth, that's becoming a lot more evolved. But there's still this idea of the image of, what's beautiful and, with the long hair and the things of that nature, which has been all too often the idea of what, beautiful is. And so that's just one of the things that kind of come to mind offhand when it comes to women and looking at race.
And so the talk then might mean that it should be about building awareness about what's happening, but also about pride. So I like the way you did that. You say in terms of with our young ladies, our girls, it's about not worrying about what others say about you, but really taking pride and appreciating your own beauty and value. Tyrone, I got to call you in again because I know you have you have a lot on your mind to step from behind the camera and come forth. So what else? What are some other things or conversations you've had with your sons about the talk and navigating society, the realities of society?
Now, one of the things that I've done is not only have I had talks with my sons, but I've gathered my sons and their friends, and it's both young ladies and young men. And we have talks in general about society, where it is and where it is not.
Tyrone, give us that age group that you're referring to.
So I have, my youngest son is 19, my older son is 27. So I have their friends in between those two ages. My daughter is 39. So I talk with her on a different level. So I'm talking about the young men and I'm talking about the young ladies that they are exposed to. And one of the things that is prevalent or is obvious in their observation is that this is this time in history, young ladies have greater freedom than they ever have had. And with that comes additional responsibility. I think we're going to find that the talk is going to become a necessity for young ladies as well. When you look at the way society started, what is this said? Girls are made of sugar and spice and everything nice.
Right.
Well, that was paramount in that time. But now with freedom comes access to things. And then it comes a management of your desires versus your wants versus your needs. And one of the things we all know is at the young age, it's difficult to correctly make decisions between those three things. Is this something I want? Is this something I need? And then you have to make decisions on that. So I think young ladies are fastly becoming a part of the conversation and the talk. But what I really like when I have an opportunity to talk with the young folks is to hear their opinion. And here's what they say. They tell me all the time, there's no need to have the talk with me because that's not my reality. And so that's a great opener. So I say, okay, let's examine that. If you say that's not your reality, well, then let's examine that. So you working a part-time job and you're working 30 hours a week, but the guy next to you is working 40 hours a week and he's supposed to be part-time as well. Who makes the decision as to who worked those hours? I say racism is such a systemic part of our society that what you're exposed to is more overt. It's more hidden now. So you have to be more vigilant in your vision and what you're looking at so that you can be aware. If you're going through life and you don't know you've been abused or misused or mistreated, then you act one way. And when I expose them to those things, they're shocked, they're in awe. And that is, for the generation that I'm dealing with, that's the talk. To help them see for themselves, not to try to get them solutions, but to help them see for themselves. Once they know, they become aware and they spread the information like wildfire.
Well, Mr. Rockman, you look like you got something to say, but unmute your mic first.
Yeah, definitely. Come on, I'm a pro at this, man. I know how to unmute and look at.
I got something else to say too.
So let me tell you, I'm gonna push back a little bit against what you're saying, Brother Tyrone, because in conversation, there is a much larger target on the back of Black men. I'm sorry. I am gonna say that, yeah, there is some. If you heard Jocelyn say it, Sabrina talked about something different, but that talk is not necessary. I'm not saying it's not necessary, but there's a level of talking that, like what Sabrina was talking about, is about pride, right? Most of us want to pour into our children, period, but specifically our girls. You're beautiful, because you know what I was always told: if you don't tell them, there's somebody else gonna come and tell them, and they'll go off with that person. So you want to make sure that you pour into your girls and let them know they're beautiful.
Correct.
They are still gonna come home. I have always been of the ilk and understanding that young men of color may not come home when you don't have that talk with them.
You're afraid,
right? There is a larger target on the back, and why do I know it? Is because Black men are more of a threat. I recently have taken a position. I'm kind of returning to my roots in the news. I got a offer from iHeartMedia, and so now I'm the national anchor for the Black Information Network. And so besides being an academic, I'm also still involved in news, and I am seeing now even more of news crossing my desk as I shared and teach storytelling to my students, issues, and it's almost like I'm living in an alternate universe. I feel like I'm in Lovecraft country. I feel like stuff is happening all over again, and I'm not saying that we shouldn't invest in our women, but I am saying I'm reading a book, and this book was just released today. It just came out. My dear friend Mark Lamont Hill just wrote this book called Seen Unseen. And it says Technology, Social Media, and the Fight for Racial Justice. Again, book just released today. The first person you see on the cover of the book is who? George Floyd, right? A Black man. I tell you that is because we as Black men are seen as more of a threat. I was told that when I ran for office 20 some years ago and was an elected official, and I've overcome, excuse me, as I remember that those circumstances, I came upon people saying, we got to stop him now. I heard that. I didn't know what they were talking about at the time, but now I understand it. So what we have to do is empower our Black men, right? To say that we need to be in all facets of society, that we don't just need to be, and I'm being cliche here, but playing basketball and football or in front of the camera, but we also need to be in the boardrooms. We also need to be in the venture capital firms. We need to be as PhDs. We need to be doing all of these things so that we have the ability to empower ourselves to be better. But Black men, we don't usually have that. That's why I was so excited when Barack Obama was elected. Y'all remember My Brother's Keepers initiative. You remember that? It was an initiative of Black men across the country. And the first thing at 12:01 p.m., as soon as the president, after Barack Obama was sworn into office, their first order of business was dismantling the My Brother's Keeper program. If that doesn't tell you the target is on Black men, nothing tells you that.
Yeah.
So, Dr. Mosley, with that said, you know, Ruckman talked about, you know, being exposed to stuff. You do a lot of mentoring. What do you say to young men that, in terms of, you know, reaching for the stars, if you will, they can be anything that they want to be, and, you know, try to remove those barriers from them? How do you motivate and encourage them in spite of everything that's going on around them?
So, listen to Mr. Jason. It really highlighted where I am with the talk with the boys that I communicate with. And so when I think about when you think about the generation that I talk to, that I work with, so that'd be more so that 11, 12-year-old, the 16, 17-year-old, 18, they try to talk to them about racism. They not feeling that because they don't see it. They see it on TV, but they don't really care about that part. So when we're having communication, the first thing we're talking about is money, because that's the number one thing that they want as fast as they can get it. And so I give them the hope of learning how to make it positively and giving them resources and showing them. They don't want to hear about, oh, you need to watch out for who you work. You know, they hear that all the time. Be careful who you around, or don't trust this. You know, they understand a lot of that. But these young men, all they want to do right now, and some of them are in real situations that they feel like they got to work to help take care of home. Some of them feel like they want a sense of independence because the parent is not giving them what they want outside of what they need inside their home. So of course the parent is saying, well, if you want to get that type of stuff, you get a job, you do this, you make this money, which is a distraction because now all they want to do is make money. Now, when you start talking to having people talk to them who make millions, or have people talk to them who are getting those jobs, and they tell them how they make money, they're listening, but they still need to be shown how. When I talk to these young boys, if it's not about money, if it's not about their girlfriend or they're on social media, you're not going to be able to grasp them in the beginning. But once we capture them, then we start feeding them with the things that they need, because the talk is completely different for them, completely different. And they just, like I say, they want quick money. Some of them they're not even thinking beyond the next day. They living for whatever they can do that day, whoever they can get in contact with, whoever they can get to hear their rap, if they're trying to rap, to see them play basketball, to see them whatever that is. For right now, they're not thinking past that until you give them the path to do that. And a lot of youth out there, they want to learn, but they don't want to keep hearing people talk about it. They want people to show them and help them get there, because people can talk. People are always talking to them, but what we do, we give them tools. We give, okay, this is what you need to do. You want to make this kind of money? This is stuff that you need to learn now. because right now the talk is so much with these youth. They don't know what a decent salary is to have. They don't know how to budget. They don't know about budgeting money. So all of that is the talk for us. So we have to break it down into different segments because it's a lot they don't know. And that talk goes far and beyond where the parents, we have to help the parents be able to learn how to do that talk too, because they don't know. A lot of parents say, you don't let nobody disrespect you. They cuss you out, you cuss them out. They do this, you do that. And that's the type of respect that some of them do. And then we have to come behind as on the education tip and say, hey, you got to do these things in a different approach because you're not going to get far at working that way. And so that's kind of where I look at the talk when I'm talking to these boys, because they are all over the place. So we have to slow down the process and then break it down for them.
Well,
Now, I think
that one of the and let me just say this, and I'm gonna go back what you want to say, Tyrone. I think that was you speaking. I do want to make sure that people understand. That people recognize or aware that we want to begin today in a new approach, an additional feature to our program, in which we want to do a call in. People that have questions and want to have a part of the discussion can call in. And even though I know it's near the end of the show, we want to provide a number so that in the future broadcast, people can talk and communicate with our guests and maybe express their opinion. The number is up on the screen. It's 904-372-3324. I know we only have a few minutes left, but anyone that wants to call in and give, let's say a couple of things, we have enough time to hear. Somebody was going to say something. I just want to bring that out.
Yeah, and that was me. And I was saying, I think by listening to the conversation here, Dr. Mosley, Mr. Johnson, and also Ms. Carson, we've all highlighted the important point. One, you have to make an assessment of where your child is. And from that assessment determines when and where you start the conversation.
And what's to be said.
But all of us have highlighted the importance of having a talk.
That's right.
I think Dr. Mosley said, you got to reach them first. When you start talking about money and them not understanding how certain jobs pay and how much money they pay, when I've had those conversations, I've gotten the same kind of responses that you have. And I've asked questions simply this here. When you get to the point where you're sufficient and on your own, how much money do you want to have?
That's right.
And when you ask them that question, then I take them through the process of where you can live, how that amount of money is going to govern your lifestyle. Right. And they are surprised at the end at the number they think is a lot doesn't get them much in society. So now I have their attention. Now I can talk to them about, now let's talk about why that amount of money that you think is a good amount is the amount that you think. This is where systemic racism come in. They've created a facade for you to believe in, to make you think that the people who are rich and have money are rappers and ball players and things of that nature. Well, that is true in part, but it's not the only story, and then I take them through the process of understanding if you're an athlete, how many years do you have to play? What's the average salary? Not the ones with the big names. What's the average salary? And what happens to that individual after his tenure in athletics has ran past? And you take that and compare that to a doctor who can work to the point where he makes the decision of when he is tired or she is done. And as Dr. Moses said, when you take them through that process, you now have their buy-in. They never really will understand racism, but they understand something is amiss, something is different. And now their antennas are up and they're ready to catch it. And they're ready to move forward in spite of what is holding them back.
Right.
Thank you. And If you're just tuning in, well, I'm sad to say that we're nearing the end of the show. Tonight, we talked about the talk that Black parents have with their children. As you have heard from tonight's discussion, the talk has evolved. Back in Dr. Kane's days, being the senior person in the group, he talked about the talk happening with him because of racism, the blatant racism that Black kids back in his day experienced. And you also heard from me, being the next senior person, on that I never had the talk as a female. My brothers did, but I didn't. And so you've heard different perspectives on the talk. I think the main thing that I'd like to learn from our panelists, and we thank them so much for joining us tonight, even our behind the scenes guy, Tyrone Jackson, is as we near the end of the show, and we hope to have you back so that we can finish the discussion. And now that we have the capability that people can dial in, that we'll actually have some people dialing in next time. This is our inaugural time, and we didn't put the word out on time that feature was available. But I would like to start with Sabrina as our one guest who has been a little quieter than the rest of us. But what are your final thoughts as we talk about, as we end the discussion tonight about the talk that Black parents have with their children?
I would say, as I stated before, that the conversation needs to be ongoing. And I also think that to piggyback a little bit off what Dr. Mosley mentioned about the students, the young people that we come across, they may not be open to that conversation. So, you know, as adults, I have conversations with my daughter all the time, ongoing conversation, but that's just myself. But as an educator, I have to find ways to implement nuggets or impart nuggets into my students who may not be receiving that talk at home, or the talk that they are receiving may not be the talk that they need to receive. It may not be in the right manner. So I think that it's, like I said, it's an ongoing conversation. And as educators and adults, we need to find ways to always try to impart those nuggets into our youth. What I was thinking about as well, when we talk about some of the youth that get caught up in those situations, a lot of times those youth are in those situations because they haven't had the talk, or the talk that they had wasn't the correct, the talk that needed to be had in a way that they really understood racism, or how to confront a situation when dealing with something racist.
Well, Sabrina, before JT, before you move on to the next guest in their opinion, Sabrina, it's my understanding, and I had a discussion with Dr. Mosley, you are trying to start, you're on a venture of starting a kind of a Black page with parents. Tell us about that real quick.
Well, it's something that I thought of probably a few months ago. I'm trying to get through school, haven't started yet, but I'm looking to start a social media, and it's going to be called Black Parents Meet. And it's just to open up the dialogue between parents, a place they can come to have conversation and feedback with one another from wherever on different topics. Because there's so much. I know I've learned so much through some of the social media groups that I'm a part of, from people from different countries all over the world, all over the United States. So I wanted to bring together a place where most people are on social media. So that's the one place that they can go to 24 hours, 7 days a week, to ask questions, to get feedback, and to learn things from one another. So I hadn't really found anything specifically geared towards just Black parents in general, whether single parents or cohabitating parents. So I wanted to, I'm looking towards, I haven't started yet. I have the name, I have the page set up. I haven't launched it yet. But to bring that together to, talk about these things where people can actually go to have a place that they can go to right there online, and it's 24/7. That's the biggest thing. You up in the middle of the night, you have a question or a thought, someone on the other side of the world, on the side of town, will be there to respond or communicate with you.
Okay, JT.
Thank you. That's great. Dr. Mosley, what are your final thoughts as we near the end of the show, the talk that Black parents have with their children?
My final thoughts is, I mean, this is big. So I would encourage parents, if you don't know how to have that talk, make sure you have the right person that you can get in touch with to have that talk, because the kids, they need it. They need to have that dialogue, because right now we're in a time where anybody can teach people the wrong thing. Kids can go on social media and learn things the wrong way. Um, and just the way society is set up, if they're not getting that talk, and to break it down, if we don't have the talk with them when they get the talk is they going to be talking about them, and they're going to be in a casket. So we have to get the talk more out in the open, and people learning to understand that this is not secret. It's not a secret. It's just we want to be able to make sure our kids understand how to move around in society, and that like somebody said, favor. It's not, life is not fair, and everybody's not going to have their best interests in mind, and they need to know all of that.
Thank you. Rockman, what are your final thoughts as we end tonight's discussion on the talk like parents should have with their children?
First of all, thank you for the opportunity to be a part of this experience with everybody. I've gained and gleaned. I've been taking notes, actually, because I like to have these discussions with not just my students, but to think about myself as I write and ponder. I think that it's important that we, as we said earlier, understand that our talk in these days and times, whereas it was more monolithic 30, 40, 50 years ago, it needs to be more targeted today, right? And that talk needs to, I liken it to Iyanla Vanzant when she said, yesterday I cried. And in that wonderful book she wrote, at the end, she said, but today I cried with a purpose. And I liken that talk. It must be a purposeful talk. It must be directed. And we have to make sure that we don't become blinded by those things that we hear. We're post-racial. We've now had an African-American president. People are doing other things in the community. People are living places they've never lived before. I was just reading a story today, a venture capital firm, a Black venture capital firm with $7 billion in assets, gave $1 million plus to FAMU just because they could. We're living in a different society, but in many of the ways, I will tell you all, with my, and I'll leave you with this. As you know, Jocelyn, and to our other panelists, I sat on the Civil Rights Task Force a couple years ago, right? It was commissioned by, at the time, City Council President Anna Brochet. And I was one of the people, I chaired one of the committees, and we were charged with creating the repository for civil rights in Jacksonville. And they tried to take our research and for lack of a better term, maneuver it to say that the task force wanted to leave the Confederate statues up. So I went down to City Council to speak about it. And as a former elected, I had that privilege, and I went down there, and there was a sea of red in the room. And I did not feel out of place, but I had never felt the eeriness that I felt that day. And when I walked in there to give the speech that I did, with all my education and all my credentials and whatever I had in the bank and my $1,000 suit and whatever else I had on, to them, I was still a you know what. However I spoke, however educated I was, and they looked at me as if they could have spat on me, as if they, and as I spoke, I found myself trying to find an exit and would not have been surprised if a bomb went off in that building. Now, I hate that I felt like that in 2022, but 2021. But I tell you that to say, until there is change everywhere, change ain't happening anywhere. And so we have to equip our sons and our daughters so when they walk out that door, that they have on a full set of armor.
Thank you. Wow. Tyrone, you came from behind the scenes. We can't let you off without giving your final thoughts on tonight's discussion.
Well, it's always a pleasure to come from behind the scenes. I enjoy being behind the scenes as well, though. I'm a geek and a techie by heart and by trade. So I really enjoy that opportunity. But I was encouraged and very excited to be a part of this discussion for a few reasons. And these reasons will lead to what I consider my close. One is because I have boys and my boys have boys. So it is important that I speak to them and speak to others with the opportunity to give some clarity, some understanding, and at the very least, some direction. I think what all of us have tried to do here is give direction. The truth is simply this: we as parents and as citizens of the sporadic village have a duty and a responsibility. And that is to make sure that each of our children, all of the children that we know, go into the community equipped at the very best to handle themselves for success. Now, this is not there's obvious that there are challenges that young Black men have that young Black women will not have. But our whole attempt is to prepare them for success in a society that looks at them being different. And the talk is paramount to them having the tools necessary to be successful. So what I want to say in closing is that if you're a parent and you haven't had the talk, or engaged in conversation with your child, then seek out others. Seek out someone who's willing to fill in that gap and have that conversation. What you may find if you just ask a few friends, what if they tell their children, they have already prepared a full soliloquy of information, and they can give you that, or they can give that to your child. The entire message is that we need to equip them.
Thank you. Dr. Kane.
Okay, so a couple of things real quick. I know we're running short on time. I'd like to congratulate Mr. Rockman on his new position with iHeartMedia, and please, and I'm sure you will. You're going to represent us well, but continue those efforts at representing the people and the ideas that you stand for. Okay. Number two, Ms. Carson, I hope that your show, your platform by which you're hoping to raise another awareness, a different level of awareness, various levels of awareness of parenting, particularly as it relates to Black parents, is very successful. I think it's something very needed, and that we can all learn from it. I will be listening. Even though I'm an old Black parent, I'm still a young great grandparent. The other thing that I find I want to congratulate our guest on is that I think they did a very good job in recognizing that times are changing. They are different than when I came up, and the kind of talk that I had that was a must at that time for me in the direction that it went. It was a must. But what's also a must is that what, as our guests have said, is that, we need to kind of cater the discussion with our kids, our youth, to what is going on with them, with social media and all the other things that are going on. They really, the talk is different, even though the concerns are the same, which is the safety and well-being of our kids. We have to look at that first and foremost. At my age, I've lived a good life, and so I am responsible for making sure that my offspring and my offspring have the opportunity to have that same good life that I did, regardless of how rough and tough it was. And finally, I want to recognize the fact that we are not supposed to leave this discussion thinking opposing Black men versus Black women in terms of what's important, in terms of that so-called talk. What we have to recognize is that this country was built on the backs of black women, between raising their own children, raising the master's children, cleaning the master's house, and working the master's field, which is what was the predominant source of income for this country, period, up until whatever point that cotton was not the predominant trade resource for this country, that this country was raised on the backs of black women. But that was at the expense of breaking the backs of black men. And that we are not in opposition to each other. We are on a journey together to make sure that our families, our loved ones, have the greatest avenue at success given the circumstances that we're facing in this white male dominated society, and that we must work together to make sure our family, our people survive in this atmosphere. And with that, I'll step away from being such a philosopher and allow you, Ms. Turner, to give your last opposing thoughts.
So first of all, thank you to all of our guests this evening as we touched on a subject that is uncomfortable for some, but important for others. It is a conversation that we need to have, and I'd like to encourage all of our listeners or those who are watching to not only have the conversation with people who look like you, but also have the conversation with people who don't look like you. Because until we're able to understand each other better, as Rockman says, things will never change. It's a shame that in 2022, we have to still have these conversations. It's a shame that I woke up to hearing that Roe versus Wade may be overturned. It's a shame that systems that have been put in place to protect others and to assure that all are treated fairly, the rights of women are being challenged, the rights of many others are being challenged for so many reasons that we all know about. America is changing. It's hard for some people to grasp. The minorities are quickly evolving into the majority. Systems are being challenged as a result of that in many instances. At Pause for the Truth, we have conversations to enlighten some and to also encourage others to continue to have the conversations with each other. Join us next week as we embark upon another discussion. And by all means, please share with others that every Tuesday night at 6:30 p.m., chime or log on to pauseforthetruth.com. And also know that we have a phone number, 904-372-3324, where you will now be able to dial in during the discussion. Again, that's 904-372-3324, pauseforthetruth.com. Thank
And
you
go to our
again.
website.
And as Dr. Kane, so see, that's what older people do. They just say what they want to. They don't care what, right?
No filter.
pauseforthetruth.com is our website. If you have any questions, suggestions on future conversations, email us at info@pauseforthetruth.com. It is an opportunity for you to share with us. If you'd like to be a guest, maybe we talked about something that you would like to come on and share your views. We're here to listen. Thanks again to our guests. Enjoy the rest of your evening. Good night.
Good night.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.